The tour guide needs to have general info about everything. Now, if every local person who knows the city very well, not just talking about Beirut, but also about Batroun, thinks that he can go taking people on tours, then we have a big problem. The history of Beirut was very intriguing for me. So I kept on researching, I kept on reading more, understanding more about the city. I am not just in love with Lebanon, I'm obsessed with it. This country has a lot of charm. And even without me telling things about it, people fall in love with it. It only needs its people to love it back.
Mira Al Khawaja, welcome to MTV.
Thank you.
I'm delighted that you're here. From what you've told me, you've only been on television once, and it was by accident. You were caught off guard. And this is your second television appearance. But this is more structured. And I'm glad you're here because I think it's a topic that's, in a way, central to the country's economy and also an important occupation when this country is not doing well. And it's a shared experience. And I'll begin by sharing with you my experience in your world. Years ago, I used to give walking tours. And I would share the city's history, Beirut's history, in a way that made sense to me. And it was a delight. It was a pleasure to do that. For 15 years, I gave history tours. And I knew all along that I was not a tour guide, but I was trying to share a story the way I understood Beirut over time. And I loved doing that. Right now, I'm behind a microphone. I've been doing podcasting for about 5 years. I'm not a journalist, but I like to observe and I like to share my thoughts in a way that makes sense to me. And to me, this is storytelling in its essence. And there's always narrative in the background. But I'm not a journalist, and I never was a tour guide. You're an official tour guide. You're a licensed tour guide. You've studied this profession, you're certified, and this is what you do for a living. And I think this is one of the most challenging occupations right now, because I don't think it's easy to celebrate everything about Lebanon all the time. Yet you're doing it almost on a daily basis. Not just Beirut, you're all over the country. And I know you're from Batroun, but that's just a footnote to what you do. You literally are all over the country, from north to south, from the mountains to the valley, you're everywhere. So you're the perfect person to ask about the tourism sector, about this dichotomy between a lovely country and its nature and its natural state of affairs, and a painful country as well, all at the same time. So let me start by asking you, what brought you to the world of tourism? Why you're a tour guide? And you're in your prime. You're young, you're healthy, and you're working in a very exhausting occupation. So what brought you to this world to begin with?
First, thank you for inviting me to your show. Regarding tour, I didn't always wanted to be a tour guide. It was by chance. I wanted to study something related to archaeology, history, or translation. But then I graduated from high school in 2006. It was the Israeli conflict back then, like it happened right after my graduation. And then my parents were like, no, you're not allowed to go to Beirut, you stay there, and Batroun, and we have like a university there. So the only two options that they had were either medical or tourism. And I thought that it's the closest thing to what I wanted. So I studied tourism, and I didn't get into the domain until like 5 years after I graduated from university. I decided to go into the tourism industry. And then, of course, back then when I graduated from university, I also got my license from the Ministry of Tourism. And then I decided to go into this business. Oh, and recently, in 2018, I started officially as a tour guide. And I started doing the free walking tours of Beirut. And this is how I fell in love with this profession. I was already licensed back then. And the history of Beirut was very intriguing for me. So I kept on researching, I kept on reading more, understanding more about the city. That it amazed me, but also how the way I was like doing the tours and meeting people from different parts of the world was also very interesting for me. And then I was addicted to this job, to this profession. And since then, I'm a full-time tour guide.
You know, without knowing much about you before, I started giving my walking tours around the same time in 2006. When you had to choose between medicine and tourism, I was giving history tours, and this was before the July War started, and I kept it going after. So it pretty much comes from the same era, but the July War and the devastation that it brought, you're deciding to go into a profession that's not easy to do. As a result of that, the tourism sector was hit hard. If I remember right, the summer of 2006 was projected to be a peak number for tourists in the country, a record-breaking number. And then 2007, it's changed completely. It takes years for it to recover. So what made you go down the road of an occupation that you know would not be stable? Financially, or for that matter, work-wise, you won't always have a job, depending on what's happening.
Well, it's funny because when I decided to study tourism, I didn't think of this. I wanted to, as I told you, study something different, like archaeology or something related to languages. And this was the closest to both majors. And I didn't think for the long term. I was just, this is the only option I have. I don't want to get into medicine field. And I didn't think about it. But then when I graduated in 2009, I got my license officially in 2010, and I didn't work in the tourism business. But back then it was picking up in Lebanon. Like around 2010, it was getting started as a tourism field. But it was not until 2015 that I got into the tourism field, but not as a tour guide.
What's interesting is that you're pursuing this when the country is not stable as well. But that means that there's a passion that that lives with or without stability, which I think is the right way to approach this. I remember in 2018, I resumed my walking tours after taking some time off, and I would see the free walking tour groups walking almost along the same path. And I don't know if I ran into you directly, but I would see what felt like the right thing, that other groups, other people are doing similar things. And I was really happy to see that this kind of approach to Beirut's history was growing. And I know for a fact that I'm not a tour guide. I know that. I'm not licensed. So therefore, I can only try to share a story in a way that's subjective, but also honest. You studied this, and it's a profession, and you have a certificate. How do you handle what could be not necessarily competition, it's not that, but more like other groups that did not go through the same process, meaning they're not certified, they don't necessarily have the licensing needed, yet they're in the same space. So how do you approach this subject between licensed tour guides, and I don't want to say fake tour guides, because that's not, I think, a right way of describing it, but more like unlicensed?
Or yeah, you can also use the word illegal.
Well, okay, so I'll let you share the way you see that kind of obstacle to your profession.
Unfortunately, nowadays, like starting with 2 years ago, we saw a booming of these illegal tour guides. They call themselves tour guides, even though this
2 years ago.
More like they existed before, but these 2 years, because of the situation that the country is going through, they thought that it's easy money, probably, that it's easy to just take people out and about in the country and start explaining just anything. They would memorize some info and they would be telling the people or taking them to nice natural places or to restaurants or different attractions. And they thought that it would be easy for them to get a foreign currency like as an income. And during these couple of years, we didn't have, as a government, we didn't have the support that we should have. So we saw a lot of people trying to imitate tour guides. In the law, this is illegal. And the law of the Ministry of Tourism, if you don't have a license that is issued by the Ministry of Tourism or by the Lebanese university, then you're not allowed to take this as a job or call yourself a tourist guide.
So when you say the government doesn't support, what does that mean? In other words, they don't shut down the illegal activity?
They don't have the means at the moment, especially with the inflation that is happening. So the number of police that should be managing this is too low. They're not enough to cover the whole territory of the Lebanon, of the country. So maybe they are only in one place. Maybe they are only in Beirut or only in Byblos. I don't know. But it's not enough to cover the whole Lebanon and to stop these people from taking advantage of this profession. And there are a lot of people that think that it's a hobby. They would be very happy to take people around the country. I don't know what they will be explaining because we study for this. A tour guide needs to have a specific personality, to follow a specific law. We have obligations. Eventually, we're not getting our rights as we should, even though we have a syndicate, and we're trying hard to maintain this profession and to keep it honest and protected in a way.
So let's try to draw a scenario or maybe a comparison. I can imagine that you're able to do your job with or without those illegal groups. So in other words, if you're taking, let's say, a tour to Byblos, a group to Byblos, and you see another group that's illegally joining a persona, a fake tour guide or illegal tour guide, the way you describe it, I'm guessing that you're still able to do your job. In other words, the group that joins you is going to join you anyway. But what is the problem in, besides it being illegal, what is the economic problem? Is it that you're getting fewer numbers? Or is it that you're getting cancellations for people that want to go to cheaper options? Where exactly is the problem?
It could be a problem, but also the other part of the problem is that we study for this. And
so is it a problem of actual accuracy, that people are giving false information?
Maybe the person that is imitating a tour guide has more info than me. Maybe they are more knowledgeable. Maybe they have a doctorate in history. I don't know. But since they are this knowledgeable, why don't they try to work in a legal frame? This is very important because there are, like in Lebanon, around, I don't know the exact number, but just an estimation of 150 up to 200 tour guides that are licensed, that speak different languages, that have knowledge in different fields, including like history, geography, archaeology. And most of them, they are not, they don't have the opportunity to get into the field because nowadays, for example, we have the social media thing. So there are a lot of people that go on Instagram, for example, or on Facebook or on TikTok, whatever, and they try to promote themselves as tourist guides or as fun people who would be interested into giving you a tour around the country. But also there are licensed guides, licensed people that can be informative, knowledgeable, respectful, and fun at the same time, that can give you a better experience.
So it's really a matter of your profession is at stake. In other words, what you spent years studying and working towards, there's a risk of it diminishing when you have other groups that are operating without that
It
lengthy
could be.
procedure. You know, and before I knew you, long before I met you, whenever a journalist would want to cover what I was doing, and they would ask me my title, I would tell them storyteller or narrator or anything but tour guide, because I remember that there was a serious problem with people faking their licensing, and I didn't want to be in that camp. I was proactive about it, and I always thought that's the way to do it. In other words, honor the tour guides and direct people to them for a licensed experience. But at the same time, there is this alternative tourism market that has expanded greatly. And I'm going to guess it goes beyond 200 people. In other words, it could be ecotourism, it could be food, it could be even wine. Sometimes archaeology in itself, that's a specialty. It's something you need to study to explain. But I think there's many ways of exploring Lebanon without a licensed tour guide. This is where it gets a bit tricky. Do you think that licensing should extend to all activity? Meaning, a group of people want to experience wine in Lebanon, and they go from vineyard to vineyard.
It is possible to explore this along with a licensed tour guide.
So, sorry, let me ask it differently. Do you think it has to be? In other words, are you comfortable with people doing this without a licensed tour guide, with somebody who's just an expert in wine?
You know, I'm not very comfortable about this because while on the road, because I know due to my experience, my very small experience in the business.
Well, it's not small. You've been studying or working in this for the better part of 15 years.
But is still, I believe that it's small. Like you have a lot of things that I can learn still.
Yeah. Oh, you mean, in other words, your own knowledge on subjects and...
Exactly, on everything. The tour guide needs to have general info about everything, specifically about Lebanon, generally about everything around the world. So whatever subject come to mind or come to the conversation, the tour guides need to have knowledge to be able to participate into this conversation. So let's say a non-official tour guide or a person who calls himself tour guide and goes with a group from Beirut to all the way to the Bekaa. They have a long trip around the Bekaa and they are exploring wineries, but still they have a 2-hour, 3-hour maybe distance on the road. What will they be talking about?
Right.
This is what mostly like I would think about what will this person be telling them.
So in other words, you're concerned that even when things are not naturally related to licensing, you're concerned that the information in itself requires a professional to be there as part of it, at least. You know, I think it's tricky terrain because tourism has become less and less government oriented. You mentioned you belong to the syndicate. And you even said at the beginning, the Ministry of Tourism maybe doesn't have the capabilities to address your concerns. But tourism is still thriving, at least during the summer. And I share your concern that it's hard to be a licensed tour guide when not enough exposure is on what you do. But I do think that naturally things are evolving. You mentioned social media. I think social media has destroyed journalism. But it's very hard to stop influencers from sharing their thoughts. And that's not a journalist's take, that's just somebody with the phone. And you see that they have hundreds of thousands of followers. They're not a journalist. But I don't know if they can be regulated. And maybe that's where it gets tricky. I don't know how you would fix this problem. Do you have an answer? Because you struggle through this issue, and I know that we've talked about it off mic. Do you have a solution in your mind? Is there a way to actually address what you're talking about?
They can start by calling themselves something different. Like for you, for example, you said that you called yourself a storyteller. They can be hosts. They can call themselves hosts.
So the name itself is a way to address this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because this is an official name. It's something really serious to call yourself a tour guide. And you haven't had the instructions properly on how to work as a tour guide.
Okay, so that I share that sentiment. So more people should be proactive about that. So let's leave that delicate terrain and go into the more, in a way, the more fun stuff. I limited my expertise to parts of Beirut. I cannot claim to be an expert on all of Beirut, or even for that matter, an expert on what I was discussing. But I think I got a lot of it right. And I spent 15 years dedicated to what I used to love doing, which was walking tours in Beirut. That's one city and one country. And I have deep admiration for certain sites, but I know that's not the whole story. Can you think of locations to you that mean the most? Because you're all over, and I've seen you. You share photos of, like, almost like you can be high in the sky in the morning, and then you'll be scuba diving in the evening. It's like you're all over the place always. And I think these are literally what you're doing every day. These are not photos from before. This is what you're doing day in, day out. So what are the sites and locations that mean the most to you?
This is a hard question.
And don't say Batroun, because that's cheating. You're from Batroun.
I have a lot of my tourists that ask me, like, what's your favorite tour, or what's your favorite destination in Lebanon? It's really, really hard for me to pick only one or top three. But what I personally enjoy doing the most is, for instance, the city of Beirut. And I try my best to always explore more, because the city, even though it's broken, and whoever visits it, they know that it's a broken city, yet it has a huge potential, a lot of history, culture, art, almost everything. It can thrive in all kinds of fields. And I like to share all of these. Like, when I have people touring around Beirut, I would be always excited to tell them about Beirut, about the city, about how it always prevails. I love Sur, the south. The south is amazing, especially the city of Sur. It has a lot also related to the ancient history of Lebanon, the Phoenicians. And maybe Baalbek. Baalbek is really important also. And the Bekaa, the whole Bekaa.
So let me make it a little more specific.
The whole 10,452 square kilometers.
That could be the right answer. I share the feeling of the whole country is magical, but I want to get deeper. You said Beirut at the beginning. Give me the sites that mean the most to you in Beirut. Because you're telling people a story, and you just said it, and that could be subjective. It's a city that, in a way, is born and reborn all the time. That's already applying your own narrative to the story. So what is it about the city? What exact locations are you talking about?
All of it, actually.
That's not an answer. No. I need specifics.
The standard tour that I usually do is in the Central District, in downtown. And it's the oldest part of Beirut. It's where the soul of the city is. But then I also expanded a bit outside of this area.
Well, what is it about downtown? Let me ask you, because I know downtown. When I used to give my tour, my walking tours, downtown for many years was locked up. You couldn't get easily into Nijmeh. There were brief periods where you could walk around the Roman baths. You could go to those Phoenician ruins underneath the souks. You could maybe wander around parts of downtown, but even then, Wadi Abu Jmil is locked up. Many parts of the city center are security zones. And today, most of downtown is inaccessible. So how do you talk about downtown? And allow me to be a bit pushy here, because I really want to know, how are you able to bring a deserted city center to life for tourists?
Through stories. So basically, I talk about a lot of things that we don't see, and a lot of things that we see. Beirut is not only about, like, whenever someone asks me about the tour of Beirut, like, what do you offer in the city of Beirut? I would always have this answer that it's not about the things that we see, it's about the things that we listen to and we learn in the city of Beirut. Especially that it's not only about the ancient history, it's also about the modern history. Like, it's very important to talk about the modern history, starting from the Ottoman period all the way until today. We are living history still. So I also include this, even if we don't see a lot, they get to know a lot, whoever is with me on the tour, a lot about Wadi Abu Jamil, even if we cannot go in, a lot about probably the war. Even when Place de l'Étoile was closed for public for 2 years, we used to talk about it, sometimes stand outside. Only if we can see the center of it, we talk about it also. The work of a tour guide is not specifically related to like ancient history and archaeology. It's also related to everything. When you're in Beirut, you need to explain the political side of the country, the reforms, the war. And this is a very tricky part.
It took me time to find an honest way of talking about pain. See, it's interesting that you mentioned up front, Beirut means a lot to you in downtown. You like to take people to the city center. It's very hard to give a rosy version of events when the city center is a ghost town. It's also, I think, hard to talk only about beauty when there's tragedy all around. So allow me to expand on what you're saying. I used to take guests to Martyrs Square, and I would seat sometimes 50, 60 people, if not more, around the statue. And I would try my best to bring Martyrs Square back to life through a story I wrote, sharing photos, having sound in the background, really trying to take people to a different place. Not the place they're in, but rather what was once there. So it's almost like they're going back in time, but it's not easy to do. It's all the more harder to do it now. I can't imagine what it's like to talk about the port blast. And maybe I can ask you. I mean, you can see the silos from Martyrs Square. You can see it from downtown. When people ask you to talk about those things, how do you confront it? That's part of the reason why I'm not doing it at the moment. I don't know how to talk about the last few years.
It took me a year, maybe more than a year after the explosion to get back to work, especially to get back to doing the tours of Beirut. It was really hard for me, but as it's my job, it's my profession, I picked up all these scattered pieces and I started doing the tour again. And at the beginning, it was very emotional for me. It was very hard to do the tour, to explain about all of this tragedy, and not to cry, for example, or not to scatter all these pieces back again to the ground when I have tourists with me. Can I
push one step further? How do you talk about the port blast? What are the words you choose to talk about something so massive and left unchecked? Meaning, the story is not over. That story it's fresh and it's raw,
but
and it's
all stories are not over. If you want to talk about the stories of Beirut, the war is not over, or the story of the war was not over. They asked me about the assassination of different people who were killed in the center of Beirut, including the port explosion. I would have one answer. They already know, they already read the news, they are all acquainted with the subject. I only state the facts, and at the end I would tell them that the facts that everyone knows, we know also, and this is pretty much it. Like, I wouldn't go further into a very subjective way. I would still be, I don't know if neutral is the correct word to say it, but my job as a tour guide is to state the facts. It's not to give my own opinion. I have an opinion, of course, but I keep it to myself. I don't share it with tourists. And this is how I started doing the tours again. I would tell them about the port explosion, the facts that everyone know, and that's it.
I don't know if it's fair to suggest something. You could tell me I'm completely wrong. I think it's the difference of having done tours in Beirut for many years before and identifying with this city more than any other city. I find it harder to do that right now. Could it be, this is a way of segueing into Batroun, could this be that you're not always here? You have some healthy distance. I'm going to guess you weren't here during the port blast.
Yes.
My apartment was completely destroyed during the port blast. You mentioned assassinations before. There's a stop on your free walking tour, maybe the first one, that's at my father's plaza next to Starco. I used to see your tour starting there, and I'm going to guess at least some reference to that tragedy is brought up. That's my father. I found a way, though. I found a way after 4 years. It took you one. I found a way after 4 years of talking about Beirut again so that it doesn't hurt. But you mentioned tears. Yeah, you cry. It's a very, very sad, very tragic tale. Could it be that you're not always identifying with Beirut? Beirut is something you love, but it's not home.
For sure. Well, yes, for sure. But I still, even if I'm not from Beirut or I'm not living there, I'm extremely attached to it. Still, of course, my experience is different than yours or from another person who was directly affected by the port explosion or by anything else that happened throughout the history. I wasn't, during the war, even I wasn't there. I was born at the last stages of the war and I was born in Batroun. We had war there, but it was not the battles that were happening in Beirut.
Yeah.
So eventually I am looking at it from an outsider's point of view, more or less. I wouldn't say outsider, still not a local from Beirut, or I was not living there at all of these stages.
I think that's a healthier way of talking about Beirut today. And that's why it's good that there's some tours still happening in this city. And actually, when I know that you're around Beirut, or sometimes I run into these groups walking, most likely with you, it does feel good to see that this type of activity has resumed. That said, though, Beirut is not a tourism destination the way it used to be.
True.
Batroun has become a tourism destination, and you're from Batroun.
Yeah, number one destination.
Number one destination.
It's the trend nowadays, yeah.
And it's local tourism and international
also, yeah.
Okay, so this is where I can play with you a bit. I know I'm not from Batroun. My relationship is maybe the way your relationship was to Beirut, meaning it's a place that I would visit. I appreciated what it had to offer, but that's not the Batroun of today. I don't like Batroun anymore. When I go now, I don't want to be there. It's everyone that I know from here who's there. It's the restaurants, it's the cafes, it's the same chains that are here. They're now there. And to be frank, I don't like this type of quick gentrified tourism, meaning it's not natural. It happens too fast. The economy seems so skewed, and it feels like a bubble. And it's not the bubble I think of when I thought the way I identified with Beirut and Beirut's tourism in the past. But Beirut had its quiche elements. It had its nightclubs. It had its very, very trendy venues. I never really identified with that here. Now when I see it there, I get a bit nervous. And you're from Batroun. So you tell me your relationship now to a city you're from. And you're going to go back there after this episode.
True. Batroun. I
Forget politics. Forget all the politics about it. Just tourism in itself and Batroun.
I feel the same way you feel about Batroun. Like when I was young, Batroun was mine. I always call it Batrounte, my Batroun. And my friends always laugh at me for this. Nowadays, I cannot call it Batrounte anymore. It's not the same Batroun. But let me tell you something. Batroun has been like this since the Phoenician period. It was always like this. And it's like history repeating itself, because it was always a city that would flourish for a few years and then it dies again, and then flourishes again with tourism, with economy, with everything. So I don't know if you remember, I was young for clubbing back then, but I don't know which year exactly, but Batroun became also a trend.
Yeah, for
and then
people
all the
from Tripoli.
nightclubs,
Yeah, most Tripoli.
or even Beirutis.
Some Beirut. Yes, on the.
And on the main street, there were like 20
Yes,
nightclubs on the same street, and
This
they
is
were
something
all
like 20 years
fully
ago or
booked.
so. Yeah, 15, 20 years
I don't
ago.
know. I know that I was young and I don't like clubbing a lot. And then everything disappeared.
Yeah.
And just in 2020, Batroun reappeared as a destination again. But the unhealthy thing is that now it lost its vibe. It lost its true identity. Everyone knows Batroun for its beaches, for it being a nice, relaxed town, quiet. We used to be able to walk in the old souk, and probably only locals, and then maybe someone from Beirut, or like even on my tours before 2020, we barely included Batroun. Nowadays, every tour that is sold to Lebanon includes the city of Batroun.
And how do you display Batroun to a tourist? Are you there to talk about restaurants and sushi and whatever? And Rami Ayesh has a restaurant now.
Lebanon.
How do you talk about an old Phoenician city the way you just described it in a way I've never heard? So that in itself is a charming way of redefining Batroun.
Batroun has its spots, actually. We have a trail, a touristic trail that we do. The tour mainly takes around 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, and we would be talking about the history of the city. And of course, we include the modern history nowadays. The souk that is nowadays full with guest houses and hotels and fancy restaurants was a traditional souk. It was built during the Ottoman period, so it still has its heritage. The architecture in Batroun is amazing because you cannot see it everywhere. It's a city that had history eventually, but probably nowadays the main aim for tourists to go there, or even locals, is not the history. It's just like to go spend a weekend or party in Batroun, and that's it. But still, it has its historical side.
So let me then take it a step further to trying to find how your industry works alongside economics. Do you think that what you're trying to do as a profession and trying to unlayer a city's past, whether it's through archaeology or anything, and then you're competing with tuk-tuks that take people around and show them the Phoenician wall from the road?
There's no competition with tuk-tuks, because whoever chooses to walk the city with a tour guide, they want to walk around it. They want to explore these hidden gems that are still considered as hidden, even though now it has changed a lot. But there's no competition.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean there's no competition?
I mean,
see thousands of people in these tuk-tuks. And sometimes
lazy people.
Lazy people. Okay. So no competition, meaning for the type of tourist that is attractive.
I think, yes. The tourists that are interested into exploring the city. We talk about alternative tourism here, for instance, for the city of Batroun. You can either explore it through a very shallow side, just to explore the beaches or have a lemonade, or at specific places also, or explore it through a local person or a local tour guide that knows the authentic places or the hidden spots, or the true essence of the city. Then it's different. Whoever wants to explore this wouldn't go on a tuk-tuk ride, for example.
I'll mirror it back to me.
Yeah.
What I think I did well at was not just the narration or not just putting the story together. And it was, at the end, it was 4 hours of me sharing a story that I had come up with based on fact, but a narration that made sense to me. Beirut is so much bigger than Batroun, and there's a lot to see in Beirut. But what I used to love doing is taking groups of people across a city that can be unrecognizable from one street corner to the next. And I'll explain. Ras Beirut to Zarif to Wadi Abu Jmil to Nijme to Khanda al-Ghami.
You used
Mono.
to do this on your tour.
Yeah. Oh, and much more. Actually, going back to when I first started, it was a 7-hour tour. It would end in Burj Hammoud.
Nice, interesting.
But let me just say one more thing, sorry. From Tabaris to Siufi to Ras al-Naba. I mean, these are extremely different parts of Beirut. And if you can skip all the quiche elements of tourism, meaning, no disrespect to Roche, you don't really need a tour guide or a tour to go to Roche. It's fine. Roche can explain itself as it is. I don't think it needs much. And I'll say this with confidence. The National Museum is beautiful, but it's not necessary. Beirut itself is a story that you don't need a museum for. It complements. Even these lovelier, smaller venues, these private museums, they're interesting. Sursat Museum is great. I think Beirut can be explored as it is outdoors and its diversity. I'm going to guess that's kind of what you're doing now in Batroun, meaning you're showing people what they would not see naturally. And it could be the scars too. It's not always good.
It's really interesting what you are doing. And now if every local person who knows the city very well, not just talking about Beirut, but also about Batroun, thinks that he can go taking people on tours, then we have a big problem. Then everyone in every city would start calling themselves a tour guide and would start taking people around the city. There are a lot of people that are in Batroun more than me. I'm a national guide. I sometimes disappear from Batroun for 7 consecutive days.
You sometimes disappear altogether. And then you're in a different country. Yeah.
True. So sometimes I would go on tour outside of Batroun for 7 days, and then I come back, I discover new things happening in the city. There are people that are there 24 by 24, 7 days a week, and that know probably more than me. But how can we enhance this field is to collaborate. You can, for instance, collaborate with a local guide, licensed person from the city of Beirut that knows all the places that you know, but probably you can add to each other. The same way goes for me.
So collaboration would help solve the earlier problem you were talking about.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I think
because it would be a chaos if everyone who feels like they know a city perfectly and they want to tell people about it and they are passionate about it, then there's no profession called a tour guide anymore. Anyone can do this.
But I also appreciate, not disagreeing with you, I appreciate that there's different ways of talking about the same story. So in other words, you can take a group of people just to Place de l'Étoile, Nijme, downtown, and that's the whole story, if that's what they want to see. You can also take people to Sporting and whatever, maybe Skybar if it ever reopens, and that's their version of history, fine. You can also take people on the streets of Beirut, make them sweat, make them feel a bit dirty, and show them rough parts of the city that I think are equally important.
We do.
Yeah, and I think all of those feed into what should be a very diverse tourism industry. I'm concerned now that the type of tourist that comes to Lebanon, if one comes, is the kind of tourist that's more interested in the quiche elements of Lebanon. And that
Not
could be...
necessarily, no. We have a lot of guides, my colleagues, that do all the areas of Beirut that are not covered by standard tours. I'm talking about myself. I do the Central District tour, but sometimes I go to Mar Mikhail, I go to the Corniche, we walk the whole Corniche, we go to Manara area, and I'm not a local.
Yeah.
But you can expect more from a local person from Beirut. I have a lot of colleagues that do this, that can do Aqlab, for example, or Al-Khanda Al-Ghami, as you were saying, Bashura, you know, all these places that we have a lot of people that ask for these. And it is offered by licensed people also. But it's not, we're not closed in one, in the box. We are outside of the box also.
Let me go even further outside this box.
Let's see.
And maybe we can wrap it up with this topic. We both have a shared love for Lebanon. That's clear. You're wearing...
Obsession.
You're wearing
Beirut,
a shirt.
Man, Beirut.
I don't have it. It's somewhere, but it's in a bag. You got me a gift that just says Beirut on it with a tree. It kind of mimics my podcast in a nice way too. Beirut Banyan flipped upside down. I know that judging from your stuff that you bring with you, I don't know where it is
My
right
tote
now.
bag,
Your
yeah,
tote
it has
bag,
the cedar tree.
and I think it's somewhere on your arm. You have a cedar tree tattoo. I mean, I don't know if the camera can get that, but show it again just to, yeah. I mean, you're literally, you're inking yourself with this country. And I think the way you describe your passion for this industry, you could probably be an international tour guide and take people all over the world. And I know you travel on your own anyway. You're going to destinations that are curious to you. And you spend most of your money that you earn simply packing up and going to a new destination. I admire this. You're in the most difficult terrain possible today. And so am I. But this shared love for Lebanon, is there a way that you justify what you're doing even when your car is breaking down, you can't fix it? You don't have enough money to rent your own home. Your family struggles, you help them. You're dependent sometimes maybe on relatives abroad sending money. Your money is locked in the account. And you have these German tourists that are very stingy, or these American tourists that are tipping too much, eccentric kinds of people that you're dependent on. And I think it can be sometimes not humiliating, that's not the right word, but there's a feeling of inferiority. It's almost like, yes, you want them to love the country you love too, but it's a one-way transaction. At least in terms of what we're dealing with the most, which is financial insecurity. So it's a big way of asking you, how do you justify what you're doing in your age this time?
I want to tell you that this country has a lot of charm. And even without me telling things about it, people fall in love with it. And I've heard it a lot from tourists that I went on tour with since 2018 all the way until today. And it gives me an amazing feeling. I am not just in love with Lebanon, I'm obsessed with it. It's a country, it's a broken country that it has so much potential. It only needs its people to love it back. If there is a group of, if we are 60% of the total population of the country that love Lebanon the way I do, then it will be the perfect country.
So you're comfortable in the insecurity part of that story? Because it's love, and loving something that's not always good for you. You're able to justify it that way?
I mean, the country as it is, it's not the situation that's happening to it or the problems that we are living. Of course, there are problems everywhere in the world. It's not only in Lebanon. The problem is here that we cannot find a way to fix the problems. But eventually, it's not, this will sound a bit cheesy. It's not what the country can offer to you, it's what you offer to this country. I feel like my job allows me to help transmit the essence of this country. It's not the problems, it's the land, nature, the history, the food, the people. If you go on tours and you explore the country without all of these elements all together, you will not understand it. If you look at Lebanon by the political conflicts that we have, or the issues that we have, the financial issues that we have, then you will never understand it.
You said essence. I think that essence stays with or without these problems. I think it's permanent. But I don't know if we are physically in our element, or mentally for that matter, okay. I think it became harder to justify the essence when it's harder to see. I will end it with this anecdote, and I'll give you the last words. I used to love showing groups of people the scars. You could sit 60 people along a ledge and talk about the Holiday Inn. And the Holiday Inn is one hell of a monster, with trees growing on the upper floors, graffiti and carved militia names inside, bullet-ridden. It's one of the worst locations of the Green Line. So many people died in one structure. I used to love talking about this building. And to me, I love doing that because I imagined that is part of our past, or it's becoming part of our past. 15 years later, I realize it's not our past, it's our present and it's our future. And that thing, that monster, the Holiday Inn, will probably be there until I die. It's not going to be removed or restored. It's going to stay as it is. That, to me, made it harder to appreciate the essence publicly. I can do it privately, but publicly became harder. It became harder to share that love in a way that wasn't always maybe lying a bit or forcing it.
I understand this. I can totally relate to this. But we cannot stay miserable like this. I mean, tourism is the main sector that brings money to the country, and it's not very well maintained as it should. We're not the best in managing tourism in this country. But then our past and present have been like this since ever. And if we're gonna be stuck at this idea, then we're not gonna evolve, we're not gonna develop. The important thing, like what I usually do, is you have to talk about everything, the positive and the negative, but in a way not to sound miserable or depressed. You talk about depression in a positive way, and there's a trick to do this. I've learned the trick eventually. Probably this is how I survive, and I decide to stay in this country, and I survive through my profession, because it's not easy to tour around a country that every day there is something new, and this new things are not always positive things. And then throughout the tour, they would be hearing news, or sometimes they go back to their country and then they text me or send me messages asking me about what's happening or the news that they read. But you have to live with this. It is what it is. You just have to live with it and to accept it. And if you can't change, you do it. If you can't change anything, you do it.
You know, you mentioned the tricks of how to translate tragedy or trauma. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's unpolished on my side. I haven't done it for a long time. There's ways to do it. And knowing that you're still doing this and you're in an industry that is vital to the Lebanese economy, and also just to the essence of this country. It's better to have someone like you pursuing this in the darkest time of our recent history than somebody who's not in it for the right reasons. You're in it, I think, for the right reasons. So for those reasons and many more, you're the first licensed tour guide I've spoken to officially on the podcast.
I should have worn my license.
I think what you're wearing is actually a better reflection, but that would be funny to have it on. Everyone should check out your page, mirage.ix on Instagram.
Thank you.
It's your licensed page, licensed tour guide page. And thank you for sharing your time talking about this industry on MTV.
Thank you for making space for this industry and this profession.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.